All right, so this is an episode on the psychology of money. If you've been following along with us, we have been going through chapter by chapter. Today is 16 and 17. So we've got some really good stuff for today. I especially like the beginning of this first chapter, so let's get started. This is the Money Master Podcast.
Welcome back to the Money Master Podcast. I'm Connie here with Nick and Tori. Thank you for joining us. As you can see, we are now here on video. So if you have been listening on the audio version of our podcast, you can now also watch us on YouTube. If you've been with us for a while and you've been going through this book, it's been very exciting, very conversational. We've had several people leave comments saying, what they've been liking about the book.
Many people have the book.
Yes.
Started reading.
Yeah, exactly. So go to your favorite bookstore, pick up a copy, and follow along with us.
I have to say, and we've said this a lot, but I think Morgan Housel is like wise beyond his years. I mean, if I could ever meet this guy, it's some pretty brilliant stuff in here.
And he writes it so well. Like, it's easy to read. It's not a bunch of heady numbers.
Right.
Yeah,
every chapter could be kind of like a standalone chapter. But what I love about chapter 16 is titled You and Me. And the first sentence says it all. The subtitle here, beware taking financial cues from people playing a different game than you are. That is so wise.
Yeah.
Like, we're not all playing the same game. And I think that's where a lot of confusion comes for people, is when we start to try to, we hear something and we think that maybe it's the advice that we should have for us.
Right. Yeah.
So what stands out in this chapter to you all?
Well, I mean, on the first section, page 167, I underlined, people make financial decisions they regret, and they often do so with scarce information and without logic, but the decisions made sense to them when they were made. Like, that happens so often. Even in our own lives, we can look back and be like, why did I do that? But for whatever reason, it made sense at that time.
You do what you
make the best decision
you have.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, right before that, he mentioned what he said in a previous chapter that we talked about. No one's crazy, right? And we kind of judge those decisions that other people make, and we don't necessarily maybe know why they made that decision.
Right.
Yep.
Investors often innocently take cues from other investors who are playing a different game than they are. And it says, depends on who you are, right? So ask yourself, well, how much should you pay for Google stock today versus maybe what you hear somebody on TV say? And it says the answer depends on who you are. Do you have a 30-year time horizon, right? So the smart price for what you should pay involves a sober analysis of Google's discounted cash flows over the next 30 years. Are you looking to sell within a year? Are you a day trader? So it gives all these examples of, you probably aren't playing the same game. Like, what's happening?
Else.
Yeah, some people are looking at it because they're getting in and out. Other people are looking at it as a long-term investment. So make sure we're playing the right game, right?
Yeah. So that goes back to what we talked about before. What's your ultimate goal, right? Like, what are you actually trying to do with the trading you're doing or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. In fact, that's why when we do financial planning, the first thing we do is we ask, what is your mission? Like, what is your money statement? What's important about money to you? Because you might get sidetracked looking at something else when it doesn't really matter for what your goal is, right? Sometimes people will say irrational things, and we may just say to them, okay, but here's my question. Why? Like, why
do you want to do that?
Why do you want to do that, right? And ultimately, if there's a good reason for it, well then, okay, maybe you're on the right track. But a lot of times it's just that we're trying to play somebody else's game. On page 169, he says, an iron rule of finance is that money chases returns to the greatest extent that it can. If an asset has momentum, it's been moving consistently up for a period of time, it's not crazy for a group of short-term traders to assume that it'll keep going up. Not indefinitely, just for a period of time that they need it to. Momentum attracts short-term traders in a reasonable way. And then it says bubbles form when the momentum of short-term returns attracts enough money that the makeup of investors shifts from mostly long-term to mostly short-term. So talking a little bit about how are bubbles formed and who are playing different games. People who are chasing short-term momentum versus people who maybe are in it for the long run. I recently talked about why is the market more volatile today than it ever was in the past on another video we did. And, in general, there's two types of investors. There's people that are in it for chasing something that's called castles in the sky, which is a way of saying the greater fool. Like if I buy something that's super overpriced, it's okay as long as I can sell it to somebody else who will also buy it for being super overpriced. And that's okay if you're in and out in time, right? And that's a totally different game than maybe something that causes the market to be more smooth, which is we look at the fundamentals, we look at the earnings, we look at the cash flows, and we say, okay, this is a good long-term investment, right? Two different types of investors making the market volatile or not. Well, let's just say it's becoming more volatile because there's more people chasing castles in the sky, and they're just playing a different game.
Well, they're looking at it because he mentions that on page 170. They're playing it in the short term. What are you looking at it in the next 3 months or the next? And we talk about that a lot when we have clients come in or we meet with them virtually. If we're not looking at this in a 1 year, 6 months, 1 year, 2 year. We're looking at 5, 7, 10 years of what's going to happen.
Another example on page 170 of that is he says, it's hard to justify paying $700,000 for a 2-bedroom Florida tract home to raise your family in for the next 10 years. But it makes perfect sense if you plan on flipping the home in a few months into a market with rising prices to make a quick profit, which is exactly what many people are doing during the bubble. Meaning, again, long-term thinking versus short-term thinking.
We all know, and we talk about a lot, stay in your lane, right? It's easy to get sidetracked by someone that you're seeing more focused on the short term. When you're focused on the long term, it's very easy to get sidetracked. So I think it's a good practice to remember to come back and ask yourself, what are my goals? What's my long-term agenda?
Yep. Some other notes here. He says bubbles do their damage when long-term investors playing one game start taking their cues from those short-term traders playing another game. Right. So
on page 172, he says when a commentator on CNBC says you should buy this stock, keep in mind they do not know who you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. I have no idea. And it says, are you, a young teenager trading for fun, or are you in retirement? And they have no idea. They can't.
Yeah, he says you could be a hedge fund manager trying to shore up your books before the quarter ends, right?
Yep. I had that same thing underlined. And so many people do take their cues from whatever they're seeing on the news channel. And gosh, this is so good. They don't know who you are.
Yeah. So here's the answer in page 173. Here's the big takeaway from this chapter. He says in the middle of page 173, the main thing I can recommend is going out of your way to identify what game you're playing, right? Mm-hmm. Know what type of investor you are. Know who you are. Do the work to figure that out and maybe remind yourself, right? Sometimes we got to be reminded because we can get sidetracked. It's like, wow, this thing is doing really well. We got to go chase NVIDIA,
Yeah. Well, we've talked about that before, not moving the goalpost. If your goalpost is this much income in retirement, that's your main goal. Not I needed this return, and then because then you're chasing so many different things that you can't make work together.
Recently, somebody actually said to you, Tori, because I was listening in, they said, I have these certain holdings that I want to keep. I have a high conviction in them because, and you gave 5 reasons that they were so great, and you said, yeah, but why? What's the point, right? Are you chasing this because you have perfectly reasonable other options that work for your goal? So why would you use those? What is it? Is it that you like to think you're going to get some excess there that you wouldn't get over here? Is that the game we're playing? And that because you knew the game that he was playing was not that, right? The game that he was playing was stable income creation for his future, which is a different
reorient.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey there, this is a quick break to talk about how you pay yourself in retirement. People often ask about how much they're going to be able to spend each month from their savings when they're no longer working. You may have heard of the 4% rule, the bucket strategy, or nameless others, but none of them do a good job measuring your true spending capacity. That is, how much can you afford to spend each month confidently? I wrote a white paper you might want to read. It's about a guardrail system for retirement that can help you do better in retirement. And I think it's probably the best withdrawal strategy available. There's no cost to download and read it. If you want a copy, all you have to do is text the word income to our business line at 214-988-9178. That's it, just the word income and send it to 214-988-9178, and we'll send that paper about guardrails straight to you.
Chapter 17, The Seduction of Pessimism. Optimism sounds like a sales pitch. Pessimism sounds like someone's trying to help you. Another chapter that I like.
With a quote, is that what you're looking at the beginning?
No, I was just thinking about this whole chapter is so true. When you talk about something negative, people are all ears all the time. But and that's why we don't see so many positive things. Like we say all the time, man, why don't they put that in the news? That's great information. That's a feel-good story, but you don't hear those too often.
No, well, that's why we both kind of chuckled at the same time. The quote at the top of this chapter says, "For reasons I have never understood, people like to hear that the world is going to hell."
Yep.
And they do. We like to, it's all a catastrophe. Everything's going to, the market's going to crash. It's an election year. What's going to happen? That's all you hear about.
Right.
Yeah.
I like the definition of optimism in this page because I've used this actually for a couple of presentations that I've done over the last couple of years. And I think it's worth to talk about what is optimism. Optimism is the best bet for most people because the world tends to get better for the most part, most of the time. Pessimism holds a special place in our hearts. Pessimism isn't just more common than optimism, it also sounds smarter. It's intellectually captivating, and it's paid more attention than optimism, which is often viewed as being oblivious to risk. So it's like if you don't pay attention, if you're not being pessimistic, well, then you're not being smart, right? Because you're
not preventing.
Yeah, you're not aware of the bad that could come. But then he says, before we go further, we should define what optimism is. Real optimists don't believe that everything will be great. That's complacency. Optimism is a belief that the odds of a good outcome are in your favor over time, even when there will be setbacks along the way. The simple idea that most people wake up in the morning trying to make things a little bit better and more productive than wake up looking to cause trouble is the foundation of optimism. I love that.
Yeah.
We've said that, we actually say that in our slide deck when we're meeting with people for the first time, is that we look for 3 types of qualities in people. One of those is, the very first one is that they're optimistic. Optimism doesn't mean that you are oblivious. It just means that you believe that everything is ultimately headed towards good. More people get out of bed trying to make the world a good place than a bad place. And there's going to be some challenges along the way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not believing every day is going to be perfect and yield perfect stock market returns. That's not what we're after.
But then he says it's more compelling. Pessimism is more compelling than optimism. It's more attractive than optimism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Page 179 says, tell someone that everything will be great, and they're likely to either shrug you off or offer a skeptical eye. Tell someone they're in danger, and you have their undivided attention.
Yeah.
Yeah. So true.
So along the same thinking on page 179, it says, if a smart person tells me that they have a stock pick that's going to rise tenfold in the next year, I'll immediately write them off as full of nonsense. If someone who's full of nonsense tells me that a stock I own is about to collapse because it's an accounting fraud, I'll clear my calendar and listen to their every word. So he's saying, somebody tells me that things are going to go up tenfold, I just say no way. But if you tell me something I own is going to go down really, really bad, I'm paying attention, right? We tend to want to believe that. Yeah. So that's why people say they're nearing the next Great Depression, you'll get on TV. But if you mention that good times are ahead, or that the markets have room to run, or that a company has huge potential, and a common reaction from commentators and spectators alike is that you're either a salesman or you're comically aloof of risks. And then the same goes for investing letters. It says the investing newsletter industry has known this for years, and it's now populated by prophets of doom despite operating in an environment where the stock market has gone up 17,000-fold in the last century, including dividends. I think this is really important because there's so many, if you write an article or a periodical, or you're on this very famous newsletter list, a lot of people will give a lot of credit to those types of things. And ultimately you have to realize that, they don't exist outside of a negative environment. The negativity
That's
is
where
what
they get their
sells, right? So it's hard to maybe get the right perspective, right? That's why we work so hard to try to kind of bring a balance. In fact, that's what financial planners and advisors do, is they try to hopefully bring a correct perspective on how things really are. Okay, in page 181, he says that one thing is that money is ubiquitous. So something bad happens, it tends to affect everybody and captures everybody's attention. But if you say there's a blizzard coming, it only affects part of the world. If something bad's coming, it affects everybody, especially when it is talking about money.
Well, on page 183, he says another is that pessimists often extrapolate present trends without accounting for how markets adapt. And this is another thing, Nick, that we talk about on our first meeting slide deck, is that you're owning companies where those CEOs and those new people are trying to solve the world's problems and trying to correct things and trying to, do better, move forward. And that doesn't, the pessimism doesn't account for that. It's just doom and gloom. It's not. We're going to be able to solve these problems and move forward.
Right. No, you bring up a great point, and that is that we tend to think that, math doesn't act the same way as human behavior changes the way markets actually act. And ultimately that's unpredictable, but ultimately, it's a factor that you can't count on like you can math because of people, right? And so he says that in 2008, Lester Brown wrote, by 2030, China would need 98 million barrels of oil a day. The world is currently producing 85 million barrels a day and may never produce much more than that. So he says, there goes the world's oil reserves. And Morgan says, he's right. The world would run out of oil in that scenario, but that's not how markets work. There is an iron law in economics. Extremely good and extremely bad circumstances rarely stay that way for long because supply and demand adapt in hard to predict ways. Okay, so even though it's like, I remember 6 months ago we heard about our reserves being down to below they've ever been and we're all in danger. And math may work that way, but not the way that supply and demand operate, right? And it operates in hard to predict ways. So there was a positive silver lining to this story, and that is, it says that it caused the price of oil to skyrocket and go way, way high. But that caused there to be so much money in oil in the story that it gave way to new technology for fracking, which then helped to compress prices again, right? So there's all these unintended consequences.
That stuff you can't anticipate, but ultimately history shows it's going to work itself out over time.
Right.
You're going to, one thing will lead to a solution that leads to another, and we can't predict that. So you just have to play the long game.
Yep. Well, it's multifaceted, right? There's more answers than just a simple answer. The simple answer is almost never right when it comes to that, this type of thing. I used to hear Jordan Peterson talk about, Christianity and religion and psychology, and people would get frustrated that there wasn't just a simple answer. He gives complicated answers, and I always thought, man, that's weird. I thought the simple answer was always right, but there's always more to the story, right? So what are the main takeaways from this chapter that we can take away? I think one thing that he says towards the end of the chapter is the short sting of pessimism prevails while the powerful pull of optimism goes unnoticed, right? Something to keep in mind. I know a lot of people have said, I'm not watching the news, I'm not watching the media anymore, but I think it affects all of us because we think the only thing we're hearing about the market and retirement is negative stuff all the time.
I think probably just going back to the beginning of the chapter, which was optimism is the belief that the odds of a good outcome are in your favor over time, even when there will be setbacks along the way. So just keep your eye on your goal. Remember that there will be setbacks, and, keep your blinders on, stay in your lane.
What good does it do to not be optimistic?
Right.
Yeah.
How does it serve you? Can you solve the problem if you're pessimist, right?
Right.
Yeah. No, it doesn't necessarily give you any options there either.
I think this chapter helped clear up for me that optimism isn't being an idiot. It's not ignoring the pessimistic side, because I'm a naturally pessimistic person. And so, there's a healthiness in being optimistic, and obviously survival requires that you be pessimistic to a certain degree as well.
Well, that's what I was thinking about throughout the whole chapter, was it's kind of either way. You don't want to be too optimistic or too pessimistic. It's coming back to the middle, right? You think stocks are going to go up this much forever and ever and ever. Maybe not, but you also don't want to be so pessimistic that it's all doom and gloom. You got to kind of stay in the middle somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
You want to wrap it up?
Yep. Well, thank you for joining us today on our book study, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Go out and grab your own copy and leave us a comment. Tell us what you like about the book, or what you want to hear more of. Thank you again. You can find us at brindleandbay.com.
Nick Davis is an investment advisor representative of Brindle Bay Financial Advisors, a registered investment advisor. This show is for informational purposes only. Any references to client experiences made may be deemed to be indirect testimonials. Clients were not compensated for providing any testimonial statements. Any references to client experiences are for illustrative purposes only. Actual client experiences will vary. Any exposure to ideas and financial vehicles discussed should not be considered financial advice or recommendation to buy or sell a financial vehicle. You should consult a qualified financial tax or legal professional before taking any action. This program is not endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any other government agency. Brindle Bay Wealth Management is affiliated with Brindle Bay Financial Advisors.